It's been sickening these last few days to watch the horrific death of MP Jo Cox, exploited mercilessly to press the case for Britain staying in the European Union. The lowest of the low just doesn't cut it. Here we have an MP who wanted to stay in the EU, a mother of two children who was killed in this grotesque attack. But even then, people have to play politics and exploit it for their own ends. I was coming back from London yesterday and looking through this paper, the Mail on Sunday, and it was the most horrendous propaganda sheet on behalf of staying in the EU, exploiting the emotion of what happened to Jo Cox to press the case it's been campaigning for all along, that the status quo remain and we stay not just in the EU centralised bureaucratic tyranny as it is, but then take the consequences of where it's planned to go from here. The case for leaving was starting to gain momentum to the point where many opinion polls were putting the leave vote ahead of that which wishes to stay in. In fact, there was a front page headline in the Sunday Mirror: "Tragic Jo's death sparks poll surge." And this seems to have been supported by polls I've seen today. The question is, why is the horrific death of Jo Cox affecting the decision to stay or not stay in the EU? The arguments are still the same. The choice between control by bureaucrats over the fine detail of our lives or taking decision-making back to within the borders of the country those decisions are made about. Extraordinary how that's being presented as extremism, wanting control over your own life. So it's not that the arguments have changed. It's that the understandable wave of horror and emotion over what has happened has been used to change the minds of significant numbers of people who are clearly, therefore, not making decisions on the basis of the facts, because they'd come to that conclusion before on the facts. The new conclusion is based on emotion. And the politicians like David Cameron have said that this attack was an attack on democracy. But the EU is deleting democracy, not even by the day, but by the hour. I've heard some people say, oh, well, we'd be safer in the EU after this attack. But this attack happened while we're in the EU. And we are looking at a decision that will affect the fine detail of people's lives for the rest of their lives, and for their children and grandchildren. And surely, in any sensible world, that decision will be made on facts and reality and not on emotion, manipulated and surfed by those with their own agenda for their own ends of keeping Britain in the tyranny. I'm seeing today all the classic elite of politics, of banking, of business coming out trying to continue the fear campaign to keep people in because it suits them. It doesn't suit the people, it suits them. And, you know, we've had a precedent to what has happened in the last few days in Britain. In Sweden in 2003, when something similar happened to a politician, when they were campaigning for Sweden to go into the euro. And I came across this report today in the economicpolicyjournal.com website. And it says this is what happened in 2003 when Sweden was voting on whether to adopt the euro. And of course, the same powers that now want Britain to stay in the EU were the powers that wanted Sweden to take the euro. What a disaster had they done so. And it says, this report, in 2003, Anna Lindh, pro-EU Swedish foreign minister, was stabbed and killed just days before Sweden was set to vote on adopting the euro. After she died, they cancelled campaigning out of respect. Here's a CNBC report on the similarities between what happened to Jo Cox and what happened to this Swedish politician. The fatal attack on a pro-European British lawmaker just a week ahead of the key Brexit referendum vote has shaken politicians and voters across the UK. While this is the first time in nearly a quarter of a century that a British politician has been murdered, the case bears startling similarities to the assassination 13 years ago in Sweden of pro-EU Anna Lindh. Days before Sweden would vote on whether to join the euro in 2003, a 46-year-old lead campaigner for Sweden to adopt the euro was stabbed while shopping in a Stockholm department store. She'd been shopping for clothes for a Eurozone debate scheduled that evening. The next day, on September the 11th, Social Democratic Foreign Minister Lindh died from her injuries. Both sides of the Swedish political campaign suspended their activities following the news, with TV ads campaigns cancelled and billboard and print media ads withdrawn. On the following Sunday, Swedes rejected proposals to adopt the common currency. Back in Britain, it says, the death of Labour Member of Parliament, MP Jo Cox, has set a similarly solemn tone around the otherwise raucous Brexit debate. The 41-year-old was shot in the small town of Birstall in the north of England, while on her way to meet with constituents in a nearby library. The attack on Lindh was carried out by what was described as a lone nut who claimed he hated politicians and was high at the time on a hypnotic drug. British police arrested 52-year-old lone nut Thomas Mair for the attack on Cox. It's a remarkable coincidence, as that report highlights. And I have a question every time one of these terrible events happens and terrorist events happen. And it's this: who benefits? Who benefits from what has happened? And who benefits from me believing the official story of what has happened? And if you apply that to the question of who benefits from the horror of what happened to Jo Cox, there is only one beneficiary. Everyone else, not least her family, are losers. And the beneficiary is that which wishes the British people not to vote to come out of the EU. And am I saying that people that you see in the Stay In campaign are possibly involved in the manipulation of emotion as they were in Sweden before a vote? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying, after 25, 26 years of research, is that the force behind global affairs that desperately, desperately wants Britain to stay in the EU because of the unraveling of the EU that could well follow, with other countries following suit. The same force that wanted Sweden to vote to take the euro is a force that is so unspeakably ruthless and psychopathic. There are no words to describe the extremes of what they are. And I know people say, oh, that Icke, it's a conspiracy theory. I'm not saying this is what happened. It's too early. What I'm saying is, as well as listening to the official story, question everything and consider that there are other possible explanations for why this has happened, when it has happened. One of the common themes that you find when terrible events happen is that so often there's an immediate official narrative that unfolds. This is how it happened, this is who did it, this is why. And often this is done without the background evidence being produced to support that narrative. For instance, I watched the tapes of the live television coverage immediately following the attacks of 9/11. And Osama bin Laden's name was there in an instant, virtually. And there was no evidence to support that. And no evidence to say that that's who was behind it. Actually, he wasn't. But even the claims that he was had no evidence to support it at the time. But he was straight in there. And once that narrative was in, it never left. That was the narrative from then on. It was bin Laden. And this time, we have a gentleman called Thomas Mair, 52-year-old. And questions and alarm bells for me always start when someone acts in a way that is totally out of character. So we have a man who is painted as some far-right racist, who has a half-brother who's of mixed race, and they got on extremely well. His brother said that he was totally non-violent, that he never talked about politics. They never even knew how he voted, and certainly never said anything of a racist nature, and that he was a gentleman. Neighbours describe him in the same fashion, who've known him for decades, some of them. As one said, he is the last person I would have thought of that would ever do anything like this. And similar things have been said by other neighbours, that they cannot believe what he is being accused of as something that he could have done, knowing him all these years. One said, I couldn't say a bad word about him. He used to volunteer to help at a school for children with learning difficulties. He volunteered to cut the lawns of the elderly. And there was no sign in his character over a very long period of time that he was capable of this. But then he didn't just kill an MP, Jo Cox. The attack was absolutely frenzied, extraordinary in its violence. What has happened to this man? Where is the man that acted in that way? Where has he been all these decades where people who knew him described him in totally different terms? Once again, I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm not saying this is how it was. But you know, if we're not going to be totally and constantly misled by believing official stories of everything by reflex action, then we have to question, and we have to look at other possibilities and see if they might explain what happened more credibly than the official story. And if the official story stands up, fair enough. Okay. But it needs to be questioned, not taken on face value. We know from endless examples in history that we've been lied to over and over and over again by officialdom over things that happen. And one thing that I would throw in the mix, not saying this is what happened, but something that should be considered as people are saying, well, hold on a minute, let's have a look at this. What could this be all about? And that is the fact that from about 1996 till around 2002, I embarked on an intensive period, year after year, of research into the nature of mind control. I spoke to mind controllers that had programmed people to carry out tasks and do horrible things that they wouldn't otherwise have done. Both sides of the Atlantic. I spoke to endless victims of mind control, both sides of the Atlantic. I spoke to therapists working to deprogram people who'd been put under mind control. Again, both sides of the Atlantic. I attended conferences in the United States on this phenomenon of mind control. And when I put all that information together, as I have in some of my books, it is very, very clear that in the right hands, shall we say, somebody's mind can be programmed to do anything. Anything! It can be programmed so that someone will pass you in the street and say, all right, mate, oh yeah, we're having a beer tomorrow, aren't we? Yeah, okay, see you then. And then walk to the top of a nearby building and jump off. That's how extreme it is. You see, the brain processes information. And if you can put into the subconscious mind a behavior pattern you want that person to follow, then when that behavior pattern is triggered, the brain will decode that information, that pattern, and that person will act exactly in line with what that program behavior is designed to make them do. Almost everyone will have heard the term Manchurian candidate, but this is Manchurian candidate and then some. What happens is they compartmentalize the mind of the target into a series of what they call in the mind control industry alters, as in altered states. They have what they call a front alter, which is the personality that people interact with all the time. That is the personality that people who know that person say that person is. He was this, she was that. But in the subconscious are other alters, other compartmentalized, programmed fragments of mind, if you like, with particular programs. I have sat in a therapist's front room near Harley Street when she was bringing out of this mind-controlled lady different personalities and behavior patterns. And all she was doing was giving the trigger code that triggered that alter to come forward and replace the front alter, the normal personality, as that person's personality and behavior. I saw personality after personality just switch like that in this lady. From a nice person to a vicious person, to one that was almost childlike. And these were different alters being accessed by the therapist, having gleaned the codes that activate these different personality and behavior patterns. So what they do is this can happen with terrorism and assassinations and what have you. And it's been happening for a long time. This is not, something that happens occasionally. This is regularly done within the intelligence agencies and the inner sanctums of the military, where they interact with the intelligence services. And they will program a behavior pattern which could be totally different to the person that they're doing it to. And that goes into the subconscious, and it sits there. And it's there waiting to be triggered by codes that are programmed in. And so a lot of these people are acting perfectly normally, and then suddenly, bang, they go into this violent assassination terrorist mode. And people said of Thomas Mair on the day that this horrific attack happened that he was walking down the street and acting as he always does. No sign of any difference. And then suddenly, suddenly. And, you know, these things and these possibilities have to be considered if we're not going to get scammed over and over and over again by just accepting the official story of everything because it's the official story. Who benefits? Who benefits from a terrorist attack? Those who want to impose more control and surveillance and take more freedoms away to protect you from what they've got you to fear. So I look at this situation where we are now with the EU. I look at what happened in Sweden. Look at what's happened in Britain. Look at the effect of what has happened in terms of people, if the opinion polls are right, deciding whether they're going to vote leave or stay in. I look at what I learned over all those years about the extraordinary power of mind control techniques. And we really should not just accept the official story without question. And let's look at a decision to stay or leave the EU based on the facts about what has happened since we joined, how freedom's been deleted on an extraordinary level since we joined, and the plan is to complete that job if we stay in. And not have a reflex action response to something that is truly, truly horrific. But how can a decision as fundamental to our future, the future of our children or grandchildren, be done on anything but the facts?